Raise your hand if you have a sweet tooth. I totally do. But how cute is this guy? So cute. This is what we're going to make now. So you're going to take your template that comes with your pattern and we're going to cut around this. This is where you need your paper scissors. And I'm not really following around the line or cutting on the line. It doesn't really matter. Again, this is a total improv project. Just as long as you get the general shape. Okay, so let's get rid of that. And then we're going to take our tooth fabric, and again, I've given you the measurements that you need for your tooth fabric, and you should have 2 pieces, a front and a back. And what you're going to do, and I've given you a little bit of excess, that's just to give you some wiggle room, just for added security. I always like a little bit of extra room to play with. And then we're going to pin this guy down in a couple of places because we're going to be cutting this guy out too. Now if you want, you can, instead of pinning and cutting out, you could trace around this if you wanted to. I just like having the template on the fabric. And let's pin these sections down here. Okay, and so we're going to repeat the same. We're just going to cut around this. And there we go. We're all set to do some quilting, because if you see in this version, I've added some straight quilting lines. So let's do that next. And we're only quilting the tops, and we're not adding a backing to this one. And you really don't need to add any spray based or anything to this because this is such a teeny tiny little project. I'm going to round out this corner here a little bit more. So when I go to sew it together, it's not super wonky. Okay. So to quilt, and I'm on the diagonal here, all you're going to do is add some masking tape and use your ruler. And you can find a spot that works good for you. It doesn't have to be exact on an angle. You're just creating a straight line to sew against. So we're going to take our masking tape, apply it off of the tooth onto the batting, using our ruler edge to make it nice and straight. Okay, and now we're going to take this to our machine. And similar to your quilt top when you quilted it, we're just using our walking foot. Our stitch length is still at 4. Our thread is white, just so it matches the tooth. But if you want to get a little crazy and do a different color, that's totally up to you. We're going to follow the edge of our tape with the edge of our walking foot here. And we're just going to quilt. The tooth. And now, because we only used 1 masking tape strip, we're going to continue to quilt this guy, but we're going to use our last line of quilting, our first line of quilting, to continue quilting our tooth. So we're just following that line. And you're going to repeat this step until you finish the whole tooth. Alright, so there is our quilted tooth. Looks really good. The next step is you're just going to cut around the batting following the edge of your tooth. And there you go. There's your finished tooth quilt top, if you will. So now we need to add the backing to it. And you can see here, here's my backing to the one that I pre-made. So what you're going to do is right sides together. And then what I like to do is sort of find a space in the middle. So we are turning this out like you would a pillow. And the reason why I like to do this is because it keeps the edge of the actual tooth that we're going to attach to the quilt top very clean. But if you want to applique this like you would normally do applique, that's totally fine. If you want to leave a little opening on the side to turn it out and then hand stitch it down, you can do that as well. I just like the way that this looks because you're not going to see this back part on the quilt top itself. You're only going to see this part. So I love how clean the edges are. So what I do is have everything nice and lined up, and then you can see here I've just made a little opening so I could turn it out. I just fold the tooth backing in half, and then I find a good spot, probably right there, looks good, and I just give a cut. And that's probably about a 3-inch cut. And then what you're going to do is you're going to pin this to your tooth, quilted top. And again, we're right sides together because we're going to turn this out. And then being a little generous with the pins, that way it doesn't shift when you sew it down. Okay, maybe one more here in the middle. Okay, so next we're going to take and we're just going to sew around this, and I'm going to switch out my foot here. We don't need our walking foot anymore. Okay, so here comes the fun part, and this is where you need to be a little slow and a little patient because you're sewing around a lot of curves. And this is why I like using the 1/4 inch foot, because it'll give me a guide. And then all we're going to do is put that under the presser foot and press down, and you can see where the tooth edge is along the edge of my foot. And I'm going to slow this down a little bit. Slow and steady wins the race with this guy. And you're just following the edge of your tooth, stopping and starting as you need to and adjusting. Removing the pins as you go. You don't need to sew over the pins. Just as long as you keep the edge up against the edge of that foot, you should be good. Okay, and as it curves, you're just going to keep following that and remove this pin so we don't get in trouble. Don't want to break a needle. Okay, so now we're coming up to a really big curve. So I just want to slow down, keep our needle in, and maybe adjust a little bit if we need to. Again, we're just kind of following the edge of our foot. Now when you get to this intersection, this is where it gets a little tricky. You're going to need to stop, keep your needle down, raise your presser foot so that it goes on top of your little quilt sandwich. And I might need to do it again because you don't want it to snag the fabric like that. It'll get kind of messy. So just adjust it, keeping your needle down if you make adjustments. And then you're gonna improvise the inside curve of the tooth. So you're just going to create your own rounded edge. Okay, and then we're going to stop. And I'm going to look at this and see what we look like here. You might need to go back in and adjust it if it's not so round, but that actually looks really good. Okay, so you're going to start where you stopped. We're going to put our needle down. And you can do a little back stitch if you want. Because you're not really handling this like you would a normal quilt, I don't think you need to back stitch as much. So we're going to start, and then we're going to meet back up with the edge of our tooth and our foot. And we're coming up on that tricky curve again, so we might want to stop and sort of adjust if we need to. You want to make sure you get those curved sections curved. If not, when you turn it out, it could be a little pointed. And I guess all teeth are different, so it might not matter. Okay. Okay, we'll line that edge back up there. Removing the pins. Again, we're just following the edge. My backing and my quilted top got a little wonky there, and that's totally okay. Again, as long as you're following the shape of the actual tooth, you should be pretty good. Now we're coming up on that top, and so we're just going to put that little divot in the tooth. Keep following the edge. We're in the home stretch. And then we're going to overlap where we started stitching. And we're just going to follow that for a little bit, and then we'll just do a little back stitch just to secure that part. And then you're all set. That looks pretty good. Okay, so we'll remove our last pin here. We'll get rid of any loose threads. There's a big one there. And if you backed up and you started, you can see here where we started and stopped again. I'm just going to pop these threads out so they don't interfere with when we turn it out, and it doesn't interfere with the shape of the tooth. But that's okay because we went over that a couple of times. Okay. All right, so because this has a lot of curves, you want to clip your curves. And basically what you're going to do is you're just going to go where there's a curved section, and you're going to snip it right up to that stitch line. You want to make sure that you don't cut your stitches. So we're just going to take our snips and kind of cut through. And this will help ease out the curve when we turn it. Okay, so now we're ready to turn this guy inside out. We're just going to be a little gentle with this. We're not going to be like a dentist and extract it. You can take the edge of your scissors, make sure they're closed, and gently start to push out the legs of the tooth. The legs, the roots maybe. There we go. And again, you're just going to be gentle. You can see it's starting to take shape. It's starting to look like a tooth. Poked out. Okay. So now what we do, there's a little loose thread, is we're going to take this to our iron and we're going to give this a good press. We want to make sure that it's nice and flat. And then what I like to do is kind of roll back the backside a little bit so you don't necessarily see that from the front. And it's okay if it wrinkles up a little bit in the back. We're going to be gluing this down so you won't see it. Give it a little steam. Okay. And there's a little thread there I want to catch and get rid of. Okay, there we go. Nice. Okay, so basically same, twinsies. And what you're going to do now is you're going to embroider the face on it. And this is really cute. Now this step you could do after you quilt it before you add the backing, but I prefer to do it once it's added. And that's kind of why I do the opening sort of in the middle of the upper part of the tooth, because that gives me a little bit of room to add the embroidery. But looks really good. So you're going to take your embroidery floss, get that ready with your needle, and then I freehand my eyes and mouth on. You know, you're just using a little half moon shape. It's nothing tricky. You could make, you know, bigger eyes if you wanted to. It's totally up to you. And I just kind of use a pencil because you're going to be covering up your pencil line with your embroidery. And I kind of come in and let's see. Okay, I want some eyes here and some eyes here. And then a little mouth. And then you take your embroidery thread and you give yourself a nice little length, probably about 1.5 feet or so. We're going to double this up. Then you take your embroidery needle. Okay, let's see if I can pull this through. Ta-da! Okay, and then you just pull it down because we're doubling up our thread, and then you knot it however you want to knot it. Again, there's so many different ways you could do it. I like to kind of hold my two tails together and then do a little knot like this, just turning it inside. And I give it a couple of knots just to secure it. Trim that off. And we're going to be doing a basic chain stitch, which is pretty easy to do. And I'm going to show you really quickly how to do that. So I'm going to kind of open up where I have that opening. And I'm going to start with one eye. And you're just going to pull, start where the end of your pencil line is. You're just going to pull your needle up with the thread. Make sure it doesn't get caught on anything in the back. And I see it, a little thread there it got caught on. Tricky. Okay, there we go. That should work now. Nice. And then you're going to just do a little stitch to get the chain started. Pulling it through. And then you're going to come back up inside that stitch that you just made to create the chain. And you want to go between the two threads. Okay, right like that. Then you're going to pull that up. And you're going to do another little stitch. Make sure you don't catch the backing there. And then we're going to add another little chain. And this is where we're going to add some little eyelashes. And I just freehand the eyelashes. If you're not comfortable with that, you can draw some little ones in. I think it makes it feel a little more sweet when they're sort of organic. And then we're just going to come down and add that in. And there's your little eyelash. Then you're going to come back up through this chain that you did before when we did the eyelash. And then you're just going to keep going, making little stitches and making little eyelashes. So you go from one eye to the mouth. If you have one continuous thread and you can keep going, I would just then connect it to the mouth and stitch the mouth, and then connect it to the eye and stitch the mouth. Or you can start and stop with each one. It's totally up to you. Then, so let's just add one more here and I'll show you what it looks like finished. Okay, so we're just making that little chain stitch, going in, and then we'll add another little eyelash after that. Pulling that through. Okay, so once it's all done, it will look like this. So you have two little eyes with some eyelashes and a little mouth, the sweetest little tooth ever. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at attaching our tooth to our quilt top.